Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Many people erroneously assume that just because libertarians oppose certain activities being undertaken coercively, that means they oppose those activities being undertaken at all. Charity is a very good example of this. Most libertarians will strongly oppose programs for the coercive redistribution of wealth, which take money from everybody through compulsory taxation and give that money to a select group of recipients. Sometimes those recipients are beneficiaries because they are said to be needy or poor or sick or disabled or elderly. Other times, these recipients are extremely wealthy, well-connected special interests, as in the case of corporate subsidies and other corporate welfare schemes. However, just because libertarians oppose those kinds of programs does not mean that libertarians oppose charity or being charitable or helping people. In fact, private charity through individuals and private organizations has a record of being considerably more efficient than coercive redistribution of wealth. There is an excellent recent paper by James Rolfe Edwards titled "The Costs of Public Income Redistribution and Private Charity," which makes that case. And in this paper, the discrepancy is startling. When you have coercive redistribution of wealth, only about 30% of the money that is collected in the form of compulsory taxation actually gets to its intended recipients. The rest is consumed by overhead. Now, in the case of private charities, virtually all charities are able to spend more than 2/3 of the money that they collect in actually directly helping the intended recipients. Now, there are many reasons why that's the case, and I actually think the most powerful explanations have nothing to do with any negative characterizations of the people administering the public charity, if you would call it that, even though I don't really think it's charity if people are forced to give the money, because they're not being charitable. There is no moral act on their part in giving that money. They have no choice other than to pay up or break the law, which is not a very appealing option. So I don't think that the people administering, for instance, a welfare program, are necessarily any less competent than the people who administer private charitable donations. I don't think their motives are any worse, necessarily, than the motives of those who work for private charities. Many people who work in welfare bureaucracies sincerely believe in what they're doing. The problem is not even that somehow these welfare bureaucracies target unworthy recipients or people who shouldn't be getting that assistance. In fact, I think very often the problem is the opposite. There's too much conditionality in how these coercively acquired funds are redistributed. There is too much procedure. There are too many steps that must be taken to disperse those funds and to verify eligibility and to verify that the people who receive those funds undertake the requisite follow-up courses of action, like seeking employment if they're unemployed and receiving unemployment assistance, or in the US, if they're on Medicaid, they're not allowed to have assets above a certain very meager threshold, and there are very detailed prescriptions about what assets an individual has to divest himself of before he can be qualified for Medicaid. Now, with all of this conditionality and with all of this oversight comes cost. Cost in terms of people's time, cost in terms of the salaries of the people who have to oversee that these conditions get adhered to. So, ironically, the desire to introduce checks and oversights and restraints on the welfare bureaucracies actually leads to the escalation of costs. But in a political system, this kind of desire is pretty much unavoidable because there are so many different constituencies. Each of them has different interests, different preferences, and one constituency may think, oh, it's really a good idea to help this particular needy group of people. Another constituency thinks, not so fast. We are worried that this will balloon into a huge expenditure. We want checks to be imposed to make sure that too many people don't get a hold of this money and people don't abuse this particular program. Now, of course, these checks are paid for largely through taxation collected from the public at large to assuage the fears of that particular special interest constituency that doesn't want that program to be overly utilized. So, paradoxically, in the effort to contain government waste, to contain costs, and to prevent so-called unworthy recipients from receiving funds from this coercive redistribution program, the special interests that want to keep that program under control may well be responsible for the high costs of that program, and the fact that despite 45 years of the so-called war on poverty in the United States, poverty is still very much with us. And in fact, had the funds that have been spent on fighting the so-called war on poverty through various programs just been directly given to every single American, just a plain division of the funds by the population, there would have been no poverty in the United States by now. So one way forward that I think would be more in line with libertarian principles, even though it would still involve some coercive redistribution of wealth, would be to transition from a conditional welfare system and the myriad programs that we have right now to an unconditional system. Now, this is an interesting proposal, and Charles Murray, who is a famous and outspoken libertarian, has written an entire book titled In Our Hands about it. This is a proposal made circa 2006 to give every single American the equivalent of $10,000. Now it would be adjusted for inflation somewhat. But in fact, based on the taxes that are currently being collected to support the various welfare programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, unemployment assistance in the United States, it would be feasible for every single American, irrespective of wealth or income, to receive that baseline of $10,000+ a year. And that's enough to live on. That's enough to buy food on, that's enough to procure some shelter with, and anything else people will have to work for. And after they receive that so-called basic income, there would be no additional aid, but there would also be no checks of eligibility, no bureaucratic hoops to go through, there would be no oversight as to what they do with that money. Rather, they get the money, so they're allowed a chance not to starve, they're allowed a chance to pay for the essential services that they may need. And then everything after that, they have to earn, which motivates them to seek out employment. Right now, in many cases with many welfare programs, there's a deterrent to employment. Even if the welfare benefits are phased out gradually, it still means that each incremental dollar earned on the labor market contributes less than an incremental dollar to income. So that dampens the incentive to go out and find work. Now, even when you have a system that tries to verify that a person is looking for work, again, is that really worth the costs of having someone there overseeing that individual. And yes, maybe that individual might be able to find work and get off of that program, but in the meantime, how much is that program spending in an effort to get that individual back to work? So, interestingly enough, a lack of conditionality may help alleviate some of the problems, but in order to work, this idea of a universal basic income has to replace the existing bureaucracies. It can't just be added on top of them. Now, in the ideal libertarian world, of course, there wouldn't be any such programs. There would be vibrant private charity. And this private charity wouldn't necessarily be confined just to people who are conventionally seen as the needy today. Think about, for instance, the world of free online services, websites, apps, even games. Do you have to be poor or needy in order to benefit from those services? No, of course not. Sometimes you could have services provided free of charge, but the creator asks for a small donation that you can provide if you value that creator's work and want to encourage further output. There is no requirement, though, no income or wealth eligibility threshold that you must not exceed to receive those services. And yet the market for those services works remarkably well. And creators are even able to benefit financially in some cases from offering them. And if not financially, at least they derive a certain intellectual or emotional benefit from being able to share their works with the general public and solicit feedback. So there is a way that through voluntary arrangements, acts of charity can extend to the population at large. And perhaps the mistake of coercive redistribution programs, as well as the mistake of those who think that governments should do more to help the poor or the needy, is to limit the focus on helping people. In fact, that limitation, I think, results in people compartmentalizing charitable behavior and thinking, oh, I pay my taxes and these programs will take care of it, and really we only need to help the people whom these programs are helping, when in fact every one of us can be put in a difficult situation for no fault of our own, just through bad circumstances happening in life. And wouldn't it be nice to have a voluntary culture that is vibrant, that has the resources, that has the mechanisms, that has the innovations to help virtually anyone when they encounter difficulties, or when they would just like a certain nice thing, as, for instance, we can obtain when we want to see a work of art. We can see it for free online. When we want to listen to a work of music, we can listen to it for free online. When we want to play one of many games, we can do that for free online. And it's not really that we would die because we don't get that. It's because human creativity and the desire of many people to provide a benefit to the world will flourish in the absence of restraint. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. I hope that gives you some food for thought, particularly on the subject of why libertarians are in fact not opposed to charity, and we would like to see many different approaches undertaken to provide charity or just free goods and services on a free market. Thank you very much.